I have to admit, when I was putting the pieces of this series together, the Battlerock Galaxy was probably the one I was least looking forward to doing. Not because I couldn't remember it. I remember it a lot better than some of the other galaxies in the game, but something about it always struck me as bland. I didn't look back on it with the same reverence as I did with others like the Honey Hive or the Beach Bowl or Gusty Garden galaxies. It wasn't so much that there were any particular aspects of the level that dragged it down, but rather there weren't any parts that elevated it. But I am, after all, a professional, and when it comes to analyzing every main galaxy in Super Mario Galaxy, I can't skip over the one I was looking forward to the least. And who knows, maybe the Battlerock Galaxy would surprise me. This series is all about diving deep under the game's surface, and even Battlerock might contain a few treasures, so let's jump into it. First mission we have here is titled Battlerock Barrage. Once again, the landing shot of this mission demonstrates an absolute mastery of camera positioning. In the foreground, we can see this collection of flying saucers leading to our first goal, the launch star floating above on the left. Then beyond that, we can see the Battlerock itself. What this does is it establishes intrigue and builds anticipation. We can see where we're supposed to go ahead of us, and now it's just a matter of getting to it. On the flying saucers, we can find these strange little helmet-clad Goombas. According to the Mario Wiki, they're called Goombeetles, and may even be robots. The functional purpose of these new enemies isn't much more than to require the player to spin into them before jumping, but the design choices with them does strike me as something deeper. They aren't just normal Goombas with helmets on, they're shorter and have these eerie glowing eyes. Makes me wonder if they were possessed in some way. Not that that would change anything. Normal Goombas seem to have no qualms about attacking Mario under the orders of Bowser, so I can't imagine why the Goombeetles would be any different. Unless, of course, they serve another master. Perhaps a less explicit function of these enemies is to get some practice with one of Mario Galaxy's lesser known moves, the homing ground pound. Essentially, if we go right into a ground pound after a midair spin, Mario will automatically aim at a nearby enemy. This move isn't mentioned in the game's instruction manual or any place in the game itself that I can find. It's a useful move during combat scenarios, and these Goombeetles provide a good place to practice with them. We can also practice it on the Toads, which feels just as warranted. Now, the homing ground pound isn't the only secret move that Mario has, but we'll get to those in later episodes. After we collect the blue star chips and pull ourselves up to the launch star, the next order of business is to get this screw in. These screws pop up throughout the course of Super Mario Galaxy, and I've always liked them a lot. Even though they might not be very mechanically deep, they represent a perfect application of Mario's spin move. When we see a screw popping out, we instinctively know what we're supposed to do with it, and we have the perfect tool at our disposal. Everyone knows the intended function of a screw. Even if you're a little kid playing a video game for the first time, you've probably learned about them from Bob the Builder. Every screw in the game makes something happen, and here that something is getting this moving platform on its way. This flying saucer leads us through an automated obstacle course that takes advantage of the game's gravity mechanic in a way that's simple but effective. The balls of electricity that rotate around it prevent us from just standing on the saucer's edge, which forces us to be constantly choosing which side to be on, the top or the bottom. To avoid damage, we're frequently moving between being upside down or right side up, something that wouldn't go nearly smoothly if the game didn't handle gravity in the way that it does. It's not a particularly intricate or challenging segment, but it succeeds because it allows the premise of Super Mario Galaxy to inform the level design. Once this ride ends, we move on to the final area of this mission, with the first thing we see being the star. Of course, because it's trapped under the glass, we can't get it yet, which leads us to explore other options. The undersides of these planets also contain a few secrets, one of which we'll talk about in a later video. We've had cannons shooting at us the whole ride over, but now it's time to use some of that firepower to our advantage. On the second planet over, we can see these bullet bills launching out, and if they happen to spot us, they'll be on our tail with pinpoint determination. Here, the developers have cleverly placed other glass containers full of a variety of goodies. These aren't just to reward us for breaking them open with bullet bills, but also to teach us that this is possible. When standing over here, it's hard to not lead a bullet bill crashing into them. If it wasn't clear to the player before, now they know exactly what to do to get the star out. This is a classic example of tutorial-free teaching, taking the golden rule of screenwriting and applying it to video games. Show, don't tell. Figuring this out on your own can be immensely satisfying. However, I don't know if the animation of the star popping out is truly a necessity. Maybe first-time players won't be bothered by it, but when you've played as much Super Mario Galaxy as I have, any animation that freezes Mario lasts all too long, no matter how short it may be. But let's move past this nitpicking and move on to the next mission in this galaxy, breaking into the Battlerock. The final goal of the previous mission is the same as the first goal in this mission, break through some glass barriers. However, while the objective might be the same, the means of getting there differ greatly. Here, we're trading the bullet bills from the previous mission for their explosive cousin, Bob-ombs. Now, I go back and forth between pronouncing their name as Bob-ombs and Bob-ombs. I'm still not quite sure which is correct because I hear people say Bob-ombs, but the world is spelled like it should be Bob-ombs. So I apologize, but you're just going to have to deal with that discrepancy. Even though this is the first appearance of Bob-ombs in Mario Galaxy, it feels half-baked, thanks to them not having legs or the trademark wind-up keys on their backs. So while they might technically be the Bob-ombs that you've come to know and love, right here they're not much more than bombs with eyes painted on. But I want to say to the big Bob-omb fan base out there, don't worry, because they'll come back in their full glory soon enough. However, I do find it strange how much of their iconic design was stripped away in this iteration, in a way that makes me feel bad for them. With no legs, they've lost any semblance of autonomy, and are at the mercy of Mario as to when they'll meet an explosive demise. In Super Mario Galaxy, the explosion radius the Bob-ombs create is pretty big, which is fine as it lets us get away with being more imprecise with our placement of them. However, I do feel like they take too long to go off, which presents an interesting conundrum on the part of the game designers. The thing is, the timing on the explosion of a Bob-omb has to be a one-size-fits-all solution. Bob-ombs are used throughout many different galaxies and areas of the game, and they can't very well create bombs that go off after different amounts of time in different areas. You need consistency for the player to rely on. If one Bob-omb goes off in a shorter amount of time than the one they've used before, that can feel unpredictable in a way that easily leads to frustration. However, the solution they've gone with also presents its own problems. Every Bob-omb in the game takes 10 seconds to explode, which sounds like a short amount of time, but for many of the tasks we need to perform with them, this is far too long. This means that much of the time we'll throw them where they need to be, and then spend the rest of the time just waiting for them to go off. Carrying a bomb should be something that makes the player tense because they don't want it to go off while it's still in their hands. And so in going with this one-size-fits-all solution, you've eliminated a lot of that tension. While the 10-second timer might be too long for one area the bombs are present in, it might be just enough for another area in another galaxy. It's a problem with no easy solution. But while I sympathize with the challenge the game designers were facing here, I do think that it could have been handled better. This same issue is also present with some of the power-ups in the game, but that's a topic I'll cover in a later video in this series. And don't worry, I won't mince any words on that. Now we move on to this everlasting gobstopper looking planet, landing right next to our cordoned off objective. Just like the ending of the last mission, it's again a great way to make the player's goal clear. Here we find some chain chomps rolling around. Similar to the Bob-ombs in the last area, they're a familiar enemy that's undergone some big changes. We hear the same bark that they've been known for since Super Mario 64 as they roll past, but otherwise the only similarities they have with their predecessors are purely aesthetic. It almost makes me wonder why they chose to use an established enemy here, rather than create a new one, when the functionality is so different. We could get one of the Bob-ombs on this planet and go right for the Luma who will take us to this next area, but for my money, we don't want to miss breaking the Rainbow Star out and taking it for a spin. It comes in very handy here in defeating all the chain chomps, because there's no way to take them down otherwise. That's where I think these invincibility power-ups are at their best. Not when they're just used to make something easier, but to let the player do things they otherwise have no ability to accomplish. Also, it's planets like the Everlasting Gobstopper that make me the most impressed with Super Mario Galaxy's camera. Even though it's an odd shape, there's no point while running around it where I feel dizzy or disoriented. I think a lot of this comes from keeping Mario in the center of the frame at all times. It acts as a solid ground to stand on, letting us focus on Mario as the world moves around him. There's no real reward, aside from the star bits, for defeating all the chain chomps here, which I think represents a slightly missed opportunity. If this challenge was in Super Mario Sunshine, it would probably net us a blue coin, or in Odyssey, maybe a moon. And while the star bits do have their usefulness, they're so prevalent in every other corner of the game that any excitement we get from collecting them has a low ceiling. Because of this, I think Super Mario Galaxy would have benefited from one other collectible, more common than the Power Stars but more rare than the Star Bits and coins. Even if the only function of this hypothetical item would have just been to add a tally back into the game's hub, that would have been fine. Modern games have proven just how effective seeing numbers go up can be, and using this as motivation to make the most out of each galaxy could have gone a long way. Up ahead, we find ourselves in an area with prolific pull stars, and one of the spots in the game where their use can really shine. Using pull stars to get Mario up to a launch star is more of a means to an end than anything else, but here they feel much more deserving of a place in such a legendary game. Navigating through the minefield, there are some very exciting elements of risk and reward at play. This is both in the extra items that might tempt us to take riskier paths, and the more intrinsic motivation of wanting to move through as quickly as possible. Going fast through a tricky section like this can make you look and feel like a pro. I think it's clear the developers knew this would happen in a lot of players' minds, because they turn it from a fun perk to an outright goal in a later galaxy. After the minefield, we make our way to the inside of the Battle Rock by way of a classic green pipe. How else are we supposed to travel in the Mario universe? Here we see that the Bob-ombs have finally gotten their legs. Good for them. These buggers light their fuses before we pick them up, which does work to add back in a bit of that tension that the ones in the beginning of the level were sorely missing. But while these are better than the ones before, they do bring a new downside. Because most players won't be sure of exactly how long the Bob-ombs fuses last, it can feel like too much of a risk to pick up one that's already been lit for a few seconds. And because only one pops out of a dispenser at a time, if we want to wait for a fresh one, that can mean we're spending time just waiting for the last one to explode. Mess up and we could be waiting through multiple bomb-bombs to get one as close to the time its fuse is lit as possible. Once we blow up the glass, we can hop into the cannon on the ground. Cannons were present in both previous 3D Mario games in some form, but I think their appearance in Galaxy is the best so far. That's thanks to the motion-controlled aiming they bring, which offers much more controllability than an N64 analog stick. With a Wii Remote, or Joy-Con, or Pro Controller in hand, it's easy to blast into the Luma and get ourselves quickly on our way. Remember how at the beginning of this mission, I talked about how the timer on the Bob-ombs had to be a certain length to accommodate sections in which we might need to carry them longer? This is it, right here. Compared to what we've dealt with so far, this is the Bob-omb equivalent of traveling from Brooklyn to Las Vegas in a 2003 two-door Jeep Wrangler. And as the former owner of a 2003 two-door Jeep Wrangler, let me tell you, that is not the kind of car you want to make a road trip in. The most I ever did in it was 3 hours, and that was stretching it. Thankfully, this section does bring some tension to Mario's journey with his pet Bob-omb, as we don't have much wiggle room to deliver the package on time. Consider this segment Nintendo's equivalent of Death Stranding. Blowing up this glass will let us hop into a cannon, which, now that we have some practice with this variety of artillery, using it to get to the star should be no problem. It's more of a timing challenge than an aiming challenge, or perhaps a challenge of how still we can hold our controller for a few seconds. Either way, it's not too hard to blast right into the Power Star, bringing the journey of Mission 2 to an end. So let's move on to the final star in the Battlerock Galaxy, Top Maniac and the Topman Tribe. We return to the same flying saucer area, albeit with noticeably fewer saucers compared to the previous levels. The other major difference is the presence of these mole enemies. Moles seem to have constant gripes with Mario throughout the various 2D and 3D games, and these guys are no different. But if we want to be pacifists, we don't have to defeat them in order to move on to the next area. We go through a brief section on this moving platform, which serves as both a repeat and a remix of the one in the first mission. It's moving forward rather than from left to right. It's a nice change of pace, but it doesn't last long enough to stand out. In the next area, we have to free this Luma in order to move on, but not by way of either bullet bills or bombs like before. Instead, we're greeted by an all-new, all-different enemy, the Top Man. These Top Men come in a few different varieties, with this one here being the most basic, the spiky Top Man. One interesting thing to note about this particular flavor of Top Man is that he's not able to damage Mario in a way that isn't at least somewhat self-inflicted. If he runs into us, he'll push us back. This doesn't hurt us by this action alone, but it does carry the possibility of ramming us into a hazard, like this electric barrier. Or if we ignore the obvious visual cue presented by this spike on his head, and we jump into him, we'll take damage then as well. The fact that the spiky Top Man can't inflict damage in a way that isn't our fault might make you think he's not a threatening enemy. Au contraire, my friend. Because while the times we take damage from the spiky Top Man might be more rare, the mental pain they cause is far greater. Accidentally hurting yourself itself feels much more insulting than being hurt by an enemy whose goal is to hurt you. But what makes the spiky top man even more interesting is that the opposite is also true. As Mario, we can spin into him, but unlike the typical enemies such as Goombas, doing this serves him no damage. Instead, we have to hit him into something that will damage him, such as the aforementioned electric barrier. This makes any encounter with the top man not just an ordinary blow-for-blow encounter, but one that requires us to use the environment to deliver a victory. Super Mario Galaxy is by no means a combat-focused game, so it doesn't do all that much with the top men. However, I do think an enemy like this would work incredibly well in a more action-oriented title, like a God of War. Imagine an adversary that's unable to do harm to Kratos directly, and vice versa, thus engaging in the player in a battle requiring both wits and reflexes against an AI opponent, necessitating the clever use of the environment to prevail. This is the type of out-of-the-box thinking that Sony Santa Monica could use more of. Although, if I was in charge there, I'd put all resources into making a new Ape Escape. Past this point, we end up in this 2D section that puts Mario in control of the gravity. It's a straightforward platforming section, yet it effectively showcases the versatility of gravity switching in both 2 and 3 dimensions. It'd be nice if it gave us more opportunities to change things up, but this is not the only section like this in the game. Just up ahead, we jump over the lasers sent out by this figure that straddles the line between obstacle and enemy, and end up in a room where we're confronted by not one, but 2 spiky top men. Besides just being mechanically interesting, one thing I like about the top men is that they give Mario a taste of his own medicine. He's been spinning into enemies this whole game, and now it's his turn to get dizzy. No touching fuzzy required. Finally, we end up on the boss planet, which is a return to the classic underside and topside formula so many other boss planets tend to follow. It's good to have something like this as a preparation area to let us get our bearings. This is also the first appearance of a Luma shop in Super Mario Galaxy. If you've already played the game, you should be well versed in how they work. Spend some star bits, get a 1-up or life mushroom. Personally, I don't think I've ever bought a 1-up from these guys. Typically, I'll buy a life mushroom because why not? It's only 30 star bits. But a 1-up? These are so common down to Princess Peach just mailing them to us, I can't imagine the game over screen is something that many players see. But I suppose some choice is nice, even if one option is clearly better than the other. Now it's time to make our way up to the boss fight, the titular top Maniac. While there might not be that much actually Maniac-ish about him, he does prove to be a quality ending for this galaxy. He's not alone though. He's accompanied by these smaller top men, known as top minis. These guys can't hurt us when they spin into us unless they spin us into something hazardous, but they can be defeated by one simple spin from Mario. That means it's a good idea to clear these guys out of the way, and then move on to the main attraction. You can probably tell from the spikes that spinning into Top Maniac is a no-go, so instead we'll have to go back to Mario's most tried and true attack, jumping. Jump on him to make him retract his blades, and then spin him into the electric walls. After we do this twice, he'll send out some of our good old friends, the spiky top men. This stage of the fight I think provides a nice contrast. There's the spiky top men who we can spin into but not jump on, and Top Maniac who we can jump on but not spin. It provides some variety, even if it's just for a short moment. One more hit in this phase, and Top Maniac is defeated. The only other thing I want to say about the top men is that I'm surprised they never made any appearances in future Mario games. They have a nice, understandable design, and they serve a unique purpose that the Goombas and Koopas don't. In fact, I'd even welcome them in the 2D Mario games, not just 3D. So that brings us to the conclusion of the Battlerock Galaxy. And after careful analysis, is this still my least favorite galaxy? Well, no. Though that doesn't have so much to do with the Battlerock Galaxy, but rather some of the other galaxies that come later. Because it turns out, some of the ones I didn't remember are a step below what I would have anticipated. And some of the ones I do remember are a whole floor lower. So the Battlerock Galaxy is still in the lower half, but the upper portion of the lower half. The aesthetics and music of the level don't do that much for me, but that's only in comparison to the pantheon of perfection that so many other galaxies make up. There's still plenty of interesting mechanics and enemies that the Battlerock Galaxy introduces, and its design is still leagues better than most other games. So while I might not love the Battlerock Galaxy, I can respect it. One galaxy I do love is the Beach Bowl Galaxy, which is what we have coming up next. Join me there next time and we'll be swimming for sparklies, shooting shells, and reminiscing about the gaming magazines of old. I hope you'll join me there.